Thank you to the more than... Sorry, someone's just repeating. Sorry, we're just waiting for someone to turn off the... Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I won't do that again, but happy 2021. Can I thank the 32,000 people that came forward to get tested to 8 p.m. last night. Dr. Chant and I have really been stressing this point across the last few days, and it's really important for us to keep those testing rates high. Overnight in New South Wales, we had 3 new cases of COVID. All 3 were in Western Sydney. 2 were from the same household. All 3 are under investigation. They're quite new, and obviously Health is making those inquiries today. But we're really keen to make sure everybody in the Greystanes, Berala, Auburn and Lidcombe areas comes forward to get testing, even if it's the mildest of symptoms. Health is obviously following up on those 3 cases, 2 of which are in the same household, to establish any links. But we're really keen to make sure people in those suburbs come forward to get testing, even if they've got the mildest of symptoms, and Health will be updating their records during the day. It's also come to our attention literally in the last few minutes that there were a couple of cases from Victoria that came in to venues in Bega and Bermagui area, and those venues will be uploaded as soon as possible to give people information. We understand that there were 2 cases from Victoria that had come up and gone to venues and events in Bega and Bermagui. But the strong message to all of us across New South Wales is to be on high alert, to come forward and get tested with the mildest of symptoms. Make sure when you're in indoor settings you're wearing a mask. Make sure if you can't guarantee social distancing you're wearing a mask. And make sure you keep COVID safe, and make sure, of course, you keep within the restrictions. We are at a stage in the pandemic where we do need to be on high alert. We want to make sure we've captured all those strains of transmission. And I want to stress again our gratitude to the Northern Beaches community. Tomorrow we'll be making some announcements regarding the southern zone of the Northern Beaches community, and obviously the settings in place for the next few weeks. And we're just deeply grateful for the patience the Northern Beaches community has shown, especially in the northern section where obviously the stay-at-home provisions are much tighter than what exists in the southern part of the state. Can I thank everybody for being pretty well behaved last night. Assistant Commissioner Mick Willing is here to give a police update. The Sydney CBD was as empty as any of us have seen it on any day, let alone New Year's Eve. But certainly there were some issues in the broader suburbs which Assistant Commissioner Willing will comment on. But generally speaking, can I thank everybody for their cooperation and respect. We need that to continue, especially in the next few weeks when all of us are on high alert. And again, I want to stress, dealing with this pandemic is an evolving situation, and every day things can change. Every day the government will consider new settings if we need to. Every day the government will make decisions and move swiftly if we feel we need to. That includes looking at events, looking at venues, looking at various settings we have across Greater Sydney and New South Wales. And we just ask everybody to please stay on high alert, be COVID safe, and make sure we support each other in dealing with this stage of the pandemic. I'll now ask Dr. Chant to give her update, then Assistant Commissioner Willing, and then we'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier. So New South Wales recorded 3 locally acquired cases of COVID in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. last night. All of the new locally acquired cases are in Western Sydney. The source of the 2 of these cases, a man in his 40s and a man in his 20s, are under investigation, and the third case, a man in his 20s, is a close household contact of one of the cases. None of these 3 cases are currently linked to the Avalon cluster, which now numbers 146, following the addition of 2 previously reported cases which have now been linked to this cluster. There were 2 new cases were acquired overseas. There were testing in the order of 32,000 and 10 tests were reported in 8 p.m. last night. So thank you very much to the community for coming forward for that testing. As the Premier indicated, we are particularly making a call out to those residents of Western Sydney, particularly those areas of Greystanes, Auburn, Berala and Lidcombe. Please come forward and get tested with even the most mildest of symptoms, and please keep up to date with the alerts on the New South Wales Government website. There are many venues that are being loaded in that area, and I will go through a number of them, but it is important that you keep yourself across those. In terms of some other updates, that investigations have revealed that a case from the Croydon cluster and a case from the Wollongong cluster both attended the Swallowed Anchor restaurant in Wollongong on the 19th of December. So last night we put out an urgent public health alert and contacted a number of people at that restaurant, and thank you for the cooperation of the owner of that restaurant, to alert them to the fact that there may have been a transmission event at that venue. So this was before either the case from Croydon cluster or the case from Wollongong had their infection, and what we're looking at is whether they were both infected at that time and date. So this is a triangulation piece. It may turn out not to be the case, but for the abundance of caution, everyone at that venue on the 19th of December needs to immediately get tested and isolate, and we will get back to you with the advice once we have those tests to hand. So anyone who attended the Swallowed Anchor at 156 to 160 Crown Street, Wollongong, on Saturday the 19th of December at any time during the day must get tested immediately and self-isolate until they receive further advice from New South Wales Health. The genomic sequencing result came back late yesterday, and what that showed is the Croydon cluster is linked to the Avalon cluster, and the two cases reported in Wollongong are also linked to the Avalon cluster. So all those cases are linked, and investigations and contact tracing are trying to establish the epidemiological links, particularly to identify those missing links, and hence the importance in relation to the Swallowed Anchor restaurant. There may have been a person at that restaurant who unknowingly had COVID at that time, who then had exposures or links to the Northern Beaches venues or sites. It is critical we get to the bottom of this, and so I urge everyone at that venue. But we are also concerned that if transmission occurred to two other people at that venue, other people may have unknowingly been infected. So again, thank you for the Wollongong population for turning out in such large numbers for testing. Testing numbers did drop off a little bit yesterday, but it is critical that we maintain those high rates of testing. As you're aware, there are a number of venues that we've nominated in Wollongong, and it is important that should anyone develop symptoms, a single test at one point in time does not predict whether you will subsequently go on and get the disease. So it is important that that vigilance, you have that strong sense of vigilance for that 14 days since you're in those exposure venues. The sewage testing has also indicated that in Wollongong, the sewage has now become positive. We have those two cases in Wollongong, but again, I will call out to that broader community around Wollongong to come forward for testing. And that catchment extends quite broadly. Please refer to our website, but it encompasses quite a broad catchment around that Wollongong, Port Kembla area. In terms of the Western Sydney cases, the three new locally acquired cases are today in Western Sydney, and there are a number of exposure venues associated with these cases. So anyone who visited any one of the following venues at the listed times is considered a casual contact who must get tested immediately and isolate until a negative test. In terms of BWS at Berala, which is on 15 to 16 Woodburn Road, Berala, anyone who was there on Thursday the 24th of December from 4:45 to 9:06 p.m, Saturday the 26th of December 9:55 to 7:04, Monday the 28th of December from 12:44 to 7:15 p.m. The Pure Thai Berala at 160 Woodburn Road, Berala, if you were there on Saturday the 26th of December, any time between 2 to 4 p.m, and Monday the 28th of December, any time between 2 to 4 p.m, and Ashfield's Bunnings on the corner of Parramatta Road and Frederick Street on Monday the 28th of December from 12 to 1 p.m. There are also a number of venues that we have listed in the Smithfield area and the Berala. In terms of the Berala Woolworths, again at 15 to 16 Woodburn Road, Berala, we're asking anyone who has been there to get tested immediately and self-isolate. And the dates there again are Thursday the 24th of December from 9 p.m. to 9:30 p.m, Saturday the 26th of December from 7 p.m. to 7:30 p.m, and Monday December 28th from 7:15 p.m. to 7:45 p.m. There are a couple of other venues, so I do urge everyone to go to that website. It is imperative at this point of time that we do all our best to come out and get that testing. That will give us an idea that we've obviously got some missing links at the moment. We hope to solve those mysteries over coming days, but you have an important role to play in the community. Please come forward and get tested, particularly in those areas that I've announced. Check the website. Please do not go to work if you have the slightest of symptoms. Please stay home and get tested. And we appreciate the support of businesses in strongly messaging to their staff around the importance of staying home. So businesses again have that key role to play in supporting people not coming to work whilst potentially symptomatic. That will all help us better understand and detect these undiagnosed and unrecognised chains of transmission. Thank you. Oh, sorry. I'll just update you in relation to the Victorian case, and literally it is hot off the press. There is a I'll just defer to Mick and then we'll get to the details.
A bit stop-start. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can I start by saying thank you to the people of New South Wales for the way they saw in the new year. Police were generally quite pleased with the way that the operation to see in the new year was conducted. The behaviour by and large was very good across the board, and people did adhere to our request to restrict their travel and to not come into the CBD. As the Premier said, the CBD area itself was as quiet as we've ever seen it. And our Marine Area Command estimate that on the water or the harbour there was approximately 20% of the vessels that we would normally see during a New Year's Eve operation. Of course, police were, as predicted, kept very busy responding to calls in the suburbs in relation to potential COVID breaches. They attended a lot of residential premises following up reports of breaches, but by and large found that a lot of those reports are actually false. And when they did have to speak to residents, they abided by the requests of police. Around midnight, we did see pockets of crowding form in particular areas across the state, but again, by and large, when asked to move on, people did abide by the police requests. However, we were a little disappointed throughout the course of the night in metropolitan Sydney to have to respond to a number of reports of people using illegal fireworks, including a very large crowd that gathered in the Villawood area watching a huge display of illegal fireworks that was broken up by the Public Order and Riot Squad. In terms of infringements and those sorts of things across the board, we're still collating some data, but I can tell you that 5 infringements were issued to commercial premises in relation to COVID breaches and 7 to individuals. There are a number of matters that are currently under investigation, including further breaches that were potentially committed by commercial premises, and a large Airbnb party in the Hills District that may see up to 30 infringement notices issued. But again, those matters are under investigation. So can I conclude by saying that we are generally pleased with the way that Sydney-siders and those in the regional areas saw in the new year. I need to thank all of those that are involved in the planning and the conduct of the operation last night, including government agencies, stakeholders, etc., emergency services, and of course, again, thank the community of New South Wales.
Thank you. And just the details in relation to those other cases that the Premier mentioned. So 2 cases travelled to New South Wales from Victoria on the 30th of the 12th, 2020. They had dinner at the Great Southern Hotel in Eden from 1700 to 1830, and the venue has been contacted and contact tracing is underway in relation to that venue. We're asking people to get tested and isolate, and Public Health will provide further updated advice as we understand the nature of exposures that occurred at that venue. And the cases also ate at a Burmese beachside cafe in Berejiklian from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock on the 31st of the 12th, 2020. We will be reaching out to that premise and undertaking contact tracing. But it is important, if you're hearing this or you know anyone who was down in that Berejiklian area, that you reach out to them and make sure that they're aware of this. We understand that there may be a lot of visitors who have travelled to that part of the woods over this festive season. Thank you.
Can I just clarify, Dr. Chant, those people, we're talking about Victorian cases who have brought COVID into New South Wales, is that what we're looking at?
That's correct. I mean, at all times we know that people move around, notwithstanding we currently have some additional border restrictions on the place. So just as the usual course, we work closely with our colleagues in Victoria. They alert us to any exposure sites here. It is part of our routine approach to infectious diseases, and we thank the cooperation of the Victorian colleagues.
Have any tests managed to discover whether those Victorian cases caught it from New South Wales people?
Look, I think it is most appropriate that Victoria comment on their investigations. We're working closely with them and assisting them. They did raise with us that there might have been a link with someone who had travelled to Sydney. I can confirm that that person tested negative, and they've now not pursuing that line of inquiry, but obviously they are continuing their investigation, and it's really a matter for them to comment on it.
Dr. Chant, can you tell us a bit more about the new cases in Western Sydney? Is Health viewing that as its own cluster? Does it have a name, or is it likely to be connected to one of the other clusters? And have you identified, as you did with the Croydon cluster, whether there are a large number of close contacts to those people who've been placed into isolation?
Look, I think I've indicated to everyone that household transmission is one of the pivotal risks, and that's why we took the action we did to decrease household gatherings and really asking the community to really understand the importance of limiting household gatherings at this critical time in our response. So it is not unusual that when we get cases, we do anticipate over the coming period that household members will test positive, and as part of our response, we immediately test household members. So as you know, for all of our venues, we have test and isolate. They will be close contacts. So immediately a case is known, household members are close contacts, they are isolated. We do arrange testing, so it's not unusual for us to see additional cases reported in subsequent days around those cases.
Just to clarify though, is it a separate, are you viewing it
so at this stage we haven't found any epidemiological links, so even the fact that we've found the links between the Croydon, Wollongong and Avalon clusters genetically, we're not actually linking those until we actually find those missing links. So that's why the restaurant exposure is one avenue of inquiry that may allow us to establish a link, and then those clusters will be linked. But at this point in time, we have the genomic sequencing has given us some additional very valuable information which will guide our investigations, and that will help us narrow and take one line of inquiry over others, which hopefully will speed up our ability to find the missing link. If we find the missing link, and that will then link us, the clusters will be linked. So at this point, the Western Sydney cases are not linked. Genomic sequencing will be available for us on Sunday, and again we'll be very interested in whether that sequence matches the Avalon cluster, or we also keep an open mind. We've obviously also had the patient transport workers, and so like all things, it's important that we don't close off any avenue of inquiry. We would progressively expect that the risk in the Northern Beaches is rapidly declining. The Northern Beaches community have been turned out for testing in rates that have been amazing. We need to, though, push this hard last bit to make sure that we don't have any simmering transmission chains. So that's why I urge all members of the Northern Beaches who have been identified as close contacts to assist us by having that exit screening. And the reason that's so important is the symptoms of COVID can be so mild, and we do not want to miss any undetected disease, and that's why we're asking the close contacts to get an exit swab, just like we do for quarantining people that have returned from overseas at that 10 to 12 day mark, which again gives us that added assurance that we really have stopped any transmission of the virus in the northern end of the northern beaches. And clearly the actions in the southern zone, means that the risk there has always been much lower. But to some extent, again, the actions by that community in coming out for testing has really reassured us that we haven't missed much transmission in that zone.
Could we please have an explanation as to why the people number limit at pub venues has been reduced from 300?
So it actually has been released. So part of our initial response to this was that we reinstituted the 1 per 4. We also stopped singing and dancing, which are behaviours that are associated with significant mingling of people, and allow the opportunity for you to interact with social networks you wouldn't. Seated alcohol service was in place but has been reinforced, and also the capacity cap limits went down to 300 with a 1 per 4. So it's not 300, it's 1 per 4 up to a maximum of 300. So those steps were taken very early in the response because we recognise the important role that hospitality venues play for amplification, and those behaviours in particular, the singing, dancing, those behaviours do allow, and I know they're enjoyable and I sound a little bit of a party pooper, but they do really allow the mixing of groups. So the more seated for dining, the more seated where we can minimise any interactions between social groups, that is the best setting we can have for COVID response.
From an epidemiological point of view, how important is it to have linked now Wollongong and Croydon back to Avalon? What sense of comfort does that give you that there may be fewer snakes in the grass?
Look, I want to acknowledge the person who actually just made that link yesterday, and again that's going back over and keeping a very open mind. Now it may turn out that's a furphy, but clearly it's an interesting link, and given the movements of the coincidence, it would have to be a very amazing coincidence if it wasn't linked. But again, I'm always very open-minded with these investigations, but it is an active avenue that we can pursue, and again I would urge everyone to cooperate with the testing. We want to make sure that there's no missing chains of transmission that have been established if transmission did occur at that venue. So for both those reasons, for us establishing those links, but most importantly to also make sure we're not missing any unrecognised chains of transmission. So again, my call out to the Wollongong community, you have been amazing over the recent days, but my message to you is that has to be a sustained effort, not just a one-off testing. Please continue to come out over the coming week so we can really be assured that we have not established any other chains of transmission in that area.
Dr. Chant, one of the things that you gave to Victoria yesterday morning, does that suggest that there's broken self-isolation, or are they returned to Victoria as well?
So my advice in relation to the Victorian travellers was that they complied fully with everything. So had a perfect response, and immediately heard the media, went and got tested. So again, this is such an important component of how the community responds and to the messaging. And can I thank you? It's good to see those numbers up at 32,000. Can I say, can we really get them even higher, as high as possible? I really want to, particularly in that area where we really will give us assurance about what's going on in that Baralla, Lidcombe, Greystanes, Western Sydney area.
Dr. Chant, I'm surprised, given the fact that I can't visit all 300 testing sites in the state, I'm surprised that 32,000 was cleared today. Yesterday in Wollongong and around Croydon, numbers were very low from the very beginning of the day. Is there a spike in the northern beaches? I mean, is that pulling its weight in terms of
So the testing rate has a little bit of a lag, because remember we report the tests that have been completed in the 24 hours. So again, we did notice a drop-off in some of the Wollongong clinics, and I suppose that's again why I'm really re-emphasising and explaining to the community why don't just have one test at one point in time. It is a really important concept that a test today does not predict your status in the tomorrow. So it is important that we get that sustained high rates of testing. But I've got all the confidence. Wollongong has had cases before, and it's been one of the communities that have absolutely responded to testing messages. So I'm keen that we'll continue to work with the community, make testing easier, and I'm hoping that we'll get that response over coming days.
Dr. Chant, on the Western Sydney cluster, obviously Western Sydney's a pretty big place. Is that household actually in Berejiklian or another suburb around it?
We're not nominating the particular suburb that the person lives in, but clearly we've indicated by their movements that we're interested around those Greystanes, Auburn, Lidcombe and Berejiklian. And if you look at the venues lists where people visit, they reflect where the risk exists. So if people are in their home and they're not going out and about, whilst they're in their home, they're only posing a risk to the household. What's most important is us conveying where those individuals have been, so that you can, if you've been at those venues, you know that there was an infectious person. So when we name those venues, that means that there was someone who was infectious with COVID present at those venues.
Dr. Chant, regarding the possible transmission event at the Swallow Amphitheatre in Wollongong, do we know whether it was the representative from the Croydon cluster who may have contracted the disease first, or whether it was the individual who's tested positive in Wollongong, or could there be a third party?
So what we know is that those two individuals, so someone from the Croydon cluster and someone from the 2 cases at Wollongong, ate at that restaurant at the same time. So what we're looking at is who else was at that restaurant that could have exposed them both at that time.
And presumably somebody from possibly the Northern Beaches.
Possibly from the Northern Beaches or from the CBD. So we have got some additional genetic information which does suggest that we would be looking at associations with CBD potentially as well, and Northern Beaches, or potentially some linkages with the patrons of the Rose. So that's just very preliminary information, but we use the genomic sequencing again to guide our investigations. And thank you to everyone. You will be getting calls and you will be getting asked questions. So again, thank you for going back over your movements in the period so that we can actually solve this puzzle.
Premier, can I ask you a question about the Northern Beaches? Given what Dr. Chant has said about the need for that last push there to snip at any chains of transmission, last night along the Esplanade there were hundreds of people gathered right under the police stay home signs. They seemed to be separate groups, but they were very close together. The police were doing their best to keep them apart. Is it frustrating to see, just as we're in the last push, those people ignoring your plea for people to celebrate New Year's at home?
Look, we have been really heartened by the response we've had from the Northern Beaches. In fact, Dr. Chant and I were discussing that we estimate close to 40% of people living in the Northern Beaches actually came forward for testing, which is amazing. And certainly in our experience, most people are doing the right thing. But of course, it's frustrating when people don't do the right thing. But as far as the Northern Beaches are concerned, given the stay-at-home provisions and given what that community has been through, generally speaking, we're really pleased. In fact, it's the Northern Beaches that are probably feeling a bit frustrated at us for imposing those stay-at-home provisions on them, whereas Greater Sydney has had greater freedom. But tomorrow we will be adjusting those settings. I've made that very clear. Especially the southern zone of the Northern Beaches will be feeling some relief from tomorrow. We'll be making announcements in that regard. We will be still having in place the main stay-at-home provisions for the northern zone until the 9th of January. And as Dr. Chant said, given the concentration of cases and given what that community's been through, we're just making sure that we've snuffed out any last transmission chains that may not have been identified before now. And given the date of the first infection that we'd identified is getting longer and longer, it gives us greater heart that most, if not all, of that community transmission has really been stomped out in that region. And once you've got that, you've put that to bed, you can focus obviously all your resources. And now in a growing number of cases in Western Sydney, I'm confident. Dr. Chant is obviously extremely cautious in the way that she approaches the links that can be established, but the health experts have done an unbelievable job in finding some common links between all those clusters, and I'm hoping the next few days we'll have more information about that.
Did you have enough contact tracers? I know this is a question for you and Dr. Chant, I guess. Could you always use more? Anybody who's unemployed, anybody
could you use a few hundred more people to help you with these things? To be honest, it's not the quantity necessarily, but it's how good people are at the job. And we've had one or two people who had major breakthroughs at the right time who found those crossovers. So it's not just the number of people you have on the job, but it's how great they are at their job. And we're lucky in New South Wales that we have got a number of people that are very good at this. And remember, right at the start of the pandemic, we employed an extra 1,000 people through Service New South Wales to support us in this as well. Because of our digital processes, the health experts can now literally use what's called protocol and text message people about what they need to do. So during the pandemic, we've used the time to improve our processes. But what's really important to us is to have the best and brightest that we have here in New South Wales focused on this task. And it's not just the number of people on the task, because we have enough people, but it's also just having people who've had enough experience and know what they're doing. And a lot of our epidemiologists, whilst they've been expert in their fields for many decades, I don't think anyone would have assumed we'd live through a pandemic. And so I'm incredibly proud of the team, incredibly proud, especially yesterday, the day before and previously. We've had some breakthrough moments where those links, those crossover links have been made, where venues have been identified, where we appreciate and assume that there's a couple of cases we still need to find to confirm those established links. And our Dr. Chant is very conservative. She'll wait to get 100% information before she speaks about it, which is the way we do things in New South Wales. But I'm a little more optimistic in terms of being able to establish some type of formal link in the next little while.
Border closure yesterday. What's your reaction to that? It seems like Regional New South Wales is copying it as well.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge here is we know that until there's a vaccine that's rolled out to the vast majority of the population, that we're going to have to live with COVID. So the strategy we've taken in New South Wales is how can we firstly maintain public health and safety without putting unnecessary stress on our citizens, and that's the fine balance we've been adopting in New South Wales. And when the situation in Victoria was quite severe some months ago, we waited until Victorian cases were consistently above 120 before we closed our border, and that was a decision we took. I don't begrudge other state premiers for taking other decisions, although at times I feel they are perhaps jumping too soon and not allowing their systems to deal with the matters at hand. We were always going to have porous borders. No matter how tight your borders are, you're still going to have exceptions where people, unbeknownst to them, had been travelling, or unbeknownst to us, had been travelling in certain places. And when you've got 55 potential crossings between New South Wales and Victoria, that's always going to happen. But what is also important to remember, and this is why we take a holistic view in New South Wales, is that when you do have a border closure, and Assistant Commissioner Willing would add to this, you are putting so many resources into a concentrated activity, which then stops you from putting those resources elsewhere, whether it's compliance, whether it's supporting the community. So during the pandemic, it's not just about getting the settings right and about ensuring health and safety number one, but it's also about what is the best use of the resources you have. I don't think at this stage closing the border between New South Wales and Victoria is a good use of resources. I think we're better off asking the community to come forward and getting tested, cutting down those or cutting off those chains of transmission, making sure everybody has enough information about venues and about COVID-safe activities. That's the strategy we've been adopting in New South Wales. And again, it's a very volatile situation. The numbers are going to bounce around. 3 is very positive today, but tomorrow they might bounce back up again. That's the nature of a pandemic, especially when somebody may take the virus home and then when they give it to all of their household, even though the household's in isolation, that's obviously going to make the numbers jump up, and that's what we've seen in the last few days. But what will concern us is if we get too many cases where we can't establish links quickly or we can't identify direct links with existing clusters, and that's why it's really important for people to come forward and get tested. And sometimes even an old case gives us information. Dr. Chant was explaining to me yesterday, when you test somebody and they have what's a particular rating on the virus content, that tells us when they got the virus, how infectious they were, and it gives us information that might shed light on other cases. And so it's really important to get those testing rates high. Every single person that gets tested, even if you're negative, you're giving us valuable information. You're giving us valuable information on your movements and valuable information just on the fact of where you live and where you got tested. And so that's really important in terms of our armoury in actually beating the virus.
You previously said you've been working on a financial support package for businesses and individuals. When will that be announced and what form?
Yeah, I can confirm that our local members and our Treasurer has also been engaging with the Chambers of Commerce in the Northern Beaches to see what targeted response or support the New South Wales Government can consider, and we're certainly considering our options in that regard. But as I said, for the southern part of the Northern Beaches, we're hoping there'll be relief beyond tomorrow, and obviously the northern part of the Northern Beaches has been under greater pressure, but we've been making sure that we're staying close to the ground. I want to thank the local members, of which the Health Minister is one, and obviously Minister Stokes and James Griffin in Manly. The three of them have been outstanding in making sure that we are aware of what's going on in their communities, and the government's considering all of our options. I'm sorry, I can't hear the question. Yeah, that's okay.
Number of mystery cases that would cause them to bring in tighter restrictions or arrangements?
Oh, look, definitely. I mean, we always rely on the health advice, but if we get to a stage or if we feel that there's too many cases that are completely unlinked or unrelated, or something pops out unexpectedly, it does cause us concern. And of course we'll adjust our settings if that's the case. But in New South Wales, we make sure we adjust our settings based on the health advice, based on the rates of testing, based on whether we can establish links. So there's a number of things we look at, a number of things we do. But from where we were, a couple of weeks ago when the cluster was at, quite large numbers, to where we are today, the strategy in place is, we feel, working. However, we are always concerned when cases pop up which we can't establish a link for at this stage, and that's why those cases in Western Sydney are a big concern for us. But we're deeply grateful that everybody who's been identified as positive has been really cooperative. They've spent hours on the phone to our experts. We've been able to get information on those venues up to inform the public as soon as possible. And we just ask everybody to be on high alert. I remember saying at every stage of the pandemic, when you leave your home, assume you have the virus or the people you're dealing with has the virus. And that means keep your distance, keep your hand sanitisers, keep your hands clean. Make sure if you have the mildest of symptoms, you've had a test and you've stayed home until further advice. And also, if you're in an indoor setting, can I stress this, please? Obviously, when you're outdoors walking or outdoors exercising, you don't need to wear a mask if there's obviously social distancing in place. But if you're in a supermarket, or you're going shopping, or you're in a place of worship, or in an indoor setting that's at high risk, you should be wearing a mask. Now, we know obviously when you're eating that's not possible, and that's why you have to be extra careful when you're going to a hospitality venue. Make sure you're using the Service New South Wales QR code system. The businesses have now got to do that from today. But as citizens, as patrons, we've also got to do our part, and we've just got to be on high alert and be COVID safe, and of course keep those most vulnerable safe at all times.
Travel to regional New South Wales on their holiday?
Look, we've obviously said, Dr. Chant's advice has been, obviously for the Northern Beaches community to date, we've said no, you've got to stay within your community. But to date, we've asked people to reconsider their plans to reduce their mobility. So long as people are COVID safe and they're reducing their mobility, we don't have any direction beyond that. So we're not going to stop people from visiting different parts of the state, but we do ask people to be extra careful. We do ask people to take extra precaution. If anyone in your family has a symptom, that family member unfortunately should stay home. And sometimes you may consider having the whole family stay home if other family members have been exposed to any symptoms and haven't been tested. Get tested and stay home. We're just asking people to delay their plans if they can, to consider the health and well-being of others. And at this stage, the direction is reduce your mobility, be extra safe, but we're not putting on any further restrictions at this stage unless the health advice changes. I'll come back, yeah, sorry.
The changes to the national anthem, that's something you've been behind for a while. What are your thoughts on that, and can we get a rendition of the new version?
My voice is extra croaky this time of day, so I won't do the rendition, but I'm incredibly proud of that change, and I want to thank the Prime Minister for making it happen. I think we're maturing as a nation to recognise our long and proud history of Indigenous Australians is something that I feel strongly about, and I know a lot of Australians do. And a new year, a new dawn, and I hope this augurs well for the future.
The budget is in a few months. How much of the old budget have you just had to throw in the fire? And of course, you're now having to plan, as you ordinarily would, for years ahead. How difficult is it doing that with the uncertainty, just not knowing what you know? Do you have to go on the ultra-conservative side?
Yeah, I think I've been saying all along, and again, without taking things out of context, we have to assume as a government that we won't have a vaccine. I know there will be a vaccine next year and there'll be a rollout. But we have to really make decisions on the basis of how can we keep a COVID-safe existence whilst keeping the economy open, and that's the fine line we're balancing. And in New South Wales, we have a plan in place which will see us get back into the black in 3 or 4 years' time. So we are planning not just for the next 6 months and 12 months, but also for the next 3 and 4 years. And what's really important to me and really important to our team here in New South Wales is to keep jobs growth going, to keep enough economic activity that keeps people in jobs, but also gives young people good job options. We know how critical it is for people to get their foot in the door of their careers, and we don't want to see too many people miss that opportunity, as well as people, more mature workers, who may see certain circumstances in their industry require them to retrain. So we're putting a lot of our effort into reskilling, retraining, encouraging businesses to set up shop in New South Wales. And we've been very buoyed by the positive response we've had from the business community, who've said that they have faced a bit of uncertainty in other states. So we're providing that certainty in New South Wales to say, whilst health and safety comes first, we're doing everything we can at every turn to keep our economy as open as possible.
How frustrating is that then, when that is such an important facet of the government's response, and there are immediate border closures on either side of the first sign of a bit of trouble here, because that then grinds our economy to a halt as well, and you're absorbing all the risk?
Oh, look, it does cause a degree of frustration, no doubt about that, and I've been very vocal about that for the last few months. Because in a situation like a pandemic, and as you said, initially we thought would be, might take 3 months or 6 months, and now we know that obviously the pandemic will take some time to finish. And I don't mean to say that in a pessimistic way, but just in a realistic way, to say that we are going to have to come to terms with living with this for a while yet. And obviously the vaccine in it is in a year, but the vaccine in a few months' time gives us great heart, because it says a proportion of our population will start to have that immunity, and obviously that will continue, the rollout will continue. But in the meantime, we have to live in a COVID-safe way, but we also can't assume that other parts of the world will have a response as quick and as comprehensive as what we do in Australia. And previously, especially a global city like Sydney has relied on international travel and trade and hospitality and tourism, and whilst there's so much disruption around the world in those supply chains and that overseas travel, it does put pressure on global cities like Sydney, and that's why our government's working really hard to try and make up for that. And so when